probably remember this prayer and learned it early in your life. The reason this next man comes up here is he is a Christian comedian. And Christian comedian Tim Hawkins has some interesting insight on that little prayer that I used for the title. In fact, he said, think about it. Just think about it for a moment. You get your little children to bed in a room all by themselves, and you teach them a prayer. Now, children, it's the prayer we pray. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. Good night, children. See you in the morning. Maybe. I remember praying that prayer, but the thing I wanted you to see this morning is how a person faces death. It tells you a lot about them. And we're going to be looking at some men this morning who in just a very short little section of Scripture, they faced death, and it was their facing of death that was their faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 20 through 22. Now, I've got to tell you ahead of time, I started early in the week, and I was on the next section, and I had the message almost finished, and I realized I left out these three guys. Now, I know I could get it past some of you. Some of you would never even notice. But then there are some others of you who you would hit me at the door. You missed three people in the Faith Hall of Fame, and so I decided I better go back and pick up these three. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. Now, as I said, we're going to be talking about death this morning. I want to mention a couple of things just by way of foundation for this message. First of all, I want to make one statement, and then I want to ask one question. The one statement is this one. The one statement is simply the fact that should the Lord tarry, unless he were to come back soon to rapture the church, most of us in this room will die pretty soon. I mean, pretty soon, that's relative, but on the scope of things, most of us are going to die pretty soon. It's just the truth. Even our youngest ones in here, again, relatively speaking, none of us has too much time on this earth. And as I've told you before, the statistics on death are pretty amazing. 1 out of every 1 dies. That's the way it happens. There is an exception, but besides that exception, all of us are going to be leaving planet Earth pretty soon. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27 says, "It is appointed unto men to die once." That messes up those of you who might believe in reincarnation, thinking you're going to come back as a bug or a toad or something or other. No, you just die once. And after this comes judgment. After this comes the time that we stand before God. Comedian Woody Allen says, "I'm not afraid of dying, I just don't want to be there when it happens." Well, guess what? There's no way to avoid it, but it's that when it happens that gets us. Because when's it going to happen? It's that not knowing that sort of throws us off. It's that inevitability, but the not knowing when And so it's the when will it happen that gives us a little bit of consternation, a little bit of fear, sometimes a little bit of troubling in our soul. Maybe we had more things we thought we should do. I remember Alan and I were talking just this week. When we were younger, it was, Lord, don't come back. I want to get married first. I want to have children. Well, you get older, and who knows what makes us say, tarry, Lord. I got things to do. But no matter how long the Lord tarries, it's going to happen. I introduced you to this website, 2 or 3 years ago, I think. But just in case you missed it, there is a website called The Death Clock. I can't read it back there. I think it's thedeathclock.com. It says, welcome to the death clock. The internet's friendly reminder that life is slipping away, second by second. Like the hourglass of the net, the death clock will remind you just how short life is. And so they ask you several things, like to put in the date of your birth and the month of your birth and the year and all of these things. They ask you under mode. That's talking about how you see life, whether you tend to be depressive, whether you tend to be optimistic. The body mass index, you have to go to a different page and you go through this stuff and it tells you how much mass you've got. Whether you're a smoker, all those things. Now, having looked, I couldn't remember before, but having looked at the death clock, the date of my death, according to the death clock, and my statistics, I'm supposed to die December the 10th, 2034. Oh, that's not too bad. Yes. The only problem is, I would think that God's death clock's a little more accurate than this one. And it could be today. It could be, but see, it's that not knowing that kind of troubles us. Sometimes it's all in the Father's hands. But sometimes we'd like things like that to be in our hands, and it's not, and it never is going to be. So unless the Lord raptures His church, everyone in the room here is going to die soon. And it is how a person dies, how they approach death, what their attitude is like at death, what their life is like approaching that time of death. Really, it says a lot about how you lived. How you die says something about how you lived. Let me give you a couple of examples. I've probably used these before, but when you look at the death of Christians and the deaths of pagans, there's such a difference. For instance, let's go to the first one, which is Dwight L. Moody. A wonderful man of God, great evangelist, wanted to reach everyone for the Lord. When he lay dying and his son was at his side, Dwight L. Moody said, "Earth recedes. Heaven opens before me. If this is death, it is sweet." And his son said, "Daddy, I think you're dreaming." And he said, no, this is not a dream. God is calling me, and I must go. And he did. I'm never surprised anymore at what I hear believers tell me when they get very close to death. And I've heard some strange stories, but good stories. Wonderful things. Not always that way, however, with the death of an unbeliever. The head of the Atheist Society in England, Sir Francis Newport, was lying on his deathbed, and they were trying to explain to him that he didn't need to worry. And he said to them, "You need not tell me there is no God, for I know there is one, and that I am in His presence. You need not tell me there is no hell. I feel myself already slipping. Wretches, cease your idle talk about there being hope for me. I know I am lost. forever. It's a big difference. It's a shame to have to come to that conclusion shortly before you die. But there's a difference between the death of believers and unbelievers. So that one statement, we're all going to die pretty soon, leads me to this one question. My one question is, when you pass on, what will you be passing on? When you go home to be with the Lord, what are you going to be leaving behind? I'm not talking stuff. Somebody asked after Howard Hughes died, well, what did he leave behind? All of it. Every bit of it. I mean, they closed down the casinos to give him one moment of silence. And it is said in one of the casinos, the pit boss watched his watch. Came the time, he rang the bell. Start again, he got his minute, and they moved on. You know. When you pass on, what will you be passing on? Several years ago, I started writing this song, never finished it. Maybe someday I will. When it's all been said, when it's all been done, when your life is over and your race is run, when you stand before the Father on the great accounting day, when it's all been said and done by then, what did you do and say? No, what did you do and say? It's all been said and done. What did you do and what did you say? When you pass on, what are you passing on? That's the issue. And that's what we're going to see in this Faith Hall of Fame as we look at these three men. Now, we've looked at several before. I remind you that the Faith Hall of Fame can be divided up between the success stories at the first part of Hebrews 11, and then the suffering stories we'll look at in the end. We're still in the success stories, and I want to introduce you to these three men of faith, whom you must know pretty well: Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. These three men who, in the way they approached death, the way they came to that moment of realization, the way they did that, they passed on something when they were passing on. And that's what we want to look at this morning. The issue is, folks, they never received the fulfillment of the earthly promises. Now, they were going to be with God. They were going to, I'm sure, what they considered paradise. They were going to life after death, and the Hebrews didn't have a strong understanding of what that might be, but they did believe it. So they were going for that, but for the earthly promises, they never saw them. And yet they kept faith all the way to the end. In fact, Hebrews chapter 11, verses 13 through 16 talks about all of the people of faith in this chapter. It says they all died in faith without receiving the promises. Those were the earthly promises. But having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth, for those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, he says, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, if they'd been thinking of this earth, if that was the only thing they looked forward to, they would have had the opportunity to return. They could have gone back to the land. They could have done this, that, or the other. But as it is, no. They desire a better country. That is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And he's prepared a city for you and for me. And he's not ashamed to be called our God if we're not ashamed to be called his children. And we look forward to that time that he has prepared for us, that he says, eye has not seen, nor has ear heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man the things that God has prepared for those who love him. But with that in mind, they died before seeing the fulfillment of the earthly promises. They died before seeing the kingdom. Remember, they were going to get a land, But they were going to get a king. They died before seeing their king, their Messiah. They died before getting all of that together. And their faith can be seen in what they passed on when they passed on. That's what I want you to keep in mind this morning as we look at them. So, first of all, let's take a look at Isaac. He's the first one mentioned in this little trio here. By faith, this is Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau, even regarding things to come. I wish we had time to go back and talk about all of the details of his life, because not only is it interesting, but it's funny in some ways. You need to understand at least that these three men that we're looking at, they put the funk in dysfunctional family. They had some real problems. So when we look at them, don't think they got it all together. They didn't. But at death, their faith said something. You know, the one thing I know about Isaac is he believed in the promise, just like his father Abraham. These were the patriarchs. These were the ones to whom God said, I'm going to give you a land, I'm going to give you great descendants, and I'm going to make you a blessing to the world, that is, to the rest of us, because the Messiah would come through them. Isaac believed in that. But you know, just like his father Abraham, he wanted to work it out his way. And God had made it clear that the promise would be not through the firstborn. Esau was his firstborn. But God had not chosen Esau because Esau had not chosen God. Whichever way you want to put it, Esau was a man who really wanted to have nothing to do with God's way of doing things. And so God had chosen Jacob. But Isaac, determined to have his own way, thought he had it worked out. Look back at Genesis chapter 27 here. Genesis chapter 27, verse 1. Now it came about, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son and said to him, My son. And he said to him, Here I am. Isaac said, Behold, now I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me. And prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die. This was 40 years before he died. He just wanted a steak. Isaac was sort of a weak man. There's not even much said about him, at least until he built an altar to God. Most of his life was running away from difficulty. But he had two sons, and he did what he shouldn't have done, and that is he preferred one son over the other. He preferred Esau. Esau was a macho man. He was a guy of the field. He smelled of the grass and the trees and the animals because he killed them. And Isaac loved, well, whatever you guys love. Venison. What's the little piggy that Ralph always has over here? Paulina. Yeah, let's eat those things. Get them out of my yard. Isaac loved that sort of thing. But it says Jacob was a gentle man. He was sort of a 50. He liked the macho man. I mean, can you imagine? These two boys were born, and it said the first one, Esau, came out all red and hairy all over. I think Rebecca must have gone, I'm having a werewolf. But they were different. And Jacob had hold of his heel. That's why he's called Yaakov, heel grabber. He's known that way from the beginning. Esau known that way from the beginning. But Daddy preferred the macho guy. So this is his setup here. Well, Rebecca, is it Rebecca or Rachel? No matter what I do, I get them confused. Anyway, one of our ladies, she was listening, and she had it all set up her way. Again, this was a man and a husband and a wife who did not communicate very well. They just set up their own little things of intrigue against each other to get things done in their way. But Esau, he did not deserve the birthright. He did not want the birthright. He did not care about such spiritual things. And I can show you. We go back to chapter 25. And this is where Jacob actually shows that he is the skillful hunter. He just doesn't do it in the way Esau does it. Chapter 25, verse 27, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau, notice, because he had a taste for game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. Jacob was sort of a mama's boy. But she also loved him because she did remember the promise of God. She did remember that God said the older would serve the younger. And maybe she's doing this all wrong, but she is trying to get things done God's way. Well, when Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished, and Esau said to Jacob, please, let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I'm famished. Now, if he had come in from the field and I'm cooking, and he calls my stuff red stuff, probably would have dumped it on his head, which would have made him more red than he was to start with. But he's oh, I'm dying. I'm so hungry. It just exaggerates his needs, and I'm famished. Therefore, his name was called Edom, red stuff. Jacob said, first, sell me your birthright. Esau said, oh, I'm about to die. So what use then is this birthright to me? I mean, he doesn't care. It's obvious he doesn't. And Jacob said, first, swear to me. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Now, notice how trivial this all sounds now. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went on his way. Just, you know. Thus, Esau despised his birthright. It meant nothing to him. He was not a spiritual man. He did not care for spiritual things. Now, I know that there are some who say, well, this story just doesn't make sense to me because most children, I mean, think about it. When there's a thing of the inheritance, they fight over it. They go after each other over it. Yeah, but see, the thing is, children usually fight over an inheritance if it involves money or stuff. There is not yet in this family a lot of quote-unquote money or stuff. All there is a promise, a covenant from God. The promise, I will bless you, I will give you this land, I will give you descendants, and I will make you a blessing. It was just a verbal promise, that's all it was. Most kids don't care about that sort of thing, and Esau didn't. Shows it very clearly in the way that he responded. You know, the Apostle Paul describes the Esau's of this life in Philippians chapter 3. Verse 18, for many walk, of whom I have often told you and now tell you even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ, whose end is destruction, whose God is their appetite, and whose glory is in their shame, who set their minds on earthly things. That was Esau. His mind was set on earthly things, and only earthly things. There was no setting his mind on eternal things at all. Albert Einstein, genius. But my understanding is he was a rather absent-minded professor. That's the problem with you and me. See, we just got so much stored up here. That's why we forget the little things. Well, he was a genius, but he was so absent-minded, he boarded a train in Princeton one day, and as he was sitting there, the conductor comes down and he's taking the tickets, and he comes to Einstein, and he just stands there, and Professor Einstein starts going through his pockets, and he can't find the ticket, and he's making a big show of things, and finally the conductor said, Dr. Einstein, I know who you are. I'm sure you bought a ticket. It's all right. I know who you are. And Einstein said to him, young man, I also know who I am, but I don't know where I'm going. Now listen, if your mind is set on earthly things, you don't know where you're going either. You don't know about things after this life. If you're like Esau and only mindful of earthly things, you don't know about that which happens after this life. You don't have a mind for it. You don't have a concern about it, but you should. You should. In fact, that's the very reason that we preach the Word each week, so you'll know. So you will have your mind set on heavenly things. But it takes faith, because God has not taken any of us there yet. And there are none of, by the way, I don't think any of those books of the people who say they've been there and come back, I don't think so. Some of you gave me that one from about the little boy, and I read it, and Sharon read it, and I said, what do you think? She said, I said, me either. That was not biblical. That was just... Now he has come out and he has said none of that was true. Of course, the publisher just had a fit when he did that. But the thing is, there is a life after this one, but by faith we accept it because we're not there yet. Esau only saw his belly. But you don't have to be an unbeliever like Esau. See, you could be a believer like Isaac. And see, the problem with Isaac is he cared more about earthly matters than he did about spiritual matters. And he cared more about one son over another son because he cared about his stomach. He cared too about earthly things. But he was a believer in God. And he was a believer in God's family, in God's future. He was no paragon of virtue. He was... Well, actually, his story's not a great one. Like his dad, he was a liar. He was a coward. He wouldn't stand up for almost anything. But he did believe the promise of God. All the other stuff in his life, not too good. But he did believe the promise of God. Do you? Let's go to the next man. Jacob. Jacob, hill grabber. That was his name, Jacob. Hebrews 11:21. By faith, Jacob, as he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning on the top of his staff. Let's talk about Jacob a moment. Jacob should have learned how bad it was for a father to care for one son over another. You would think he would have learned from his dad doing that. He did the same thing. He cared for Joseph over all of his other sons. He did exactly the same thing. Didn't learn it all from him. The other thing we know about Jacob, and I wish we had time to look into all of his story, but he was a notorious deceiver. He worked it all out himself, he thought. But you remember that story about him wrestling with God? Well, that's one of those stories that you don't exactly know what to do with it. I mean, you understand the point, but what really went on and what didn't, and we sort of argue over that, but that's who he was. He wrestled even with God, trying to get his way. He wasn't perfect either. But when he was dying, his faith shows up. He did believe the promise of God. Let me take you back to the story, Genesis chapter 48. Now, you remember Joseph has been carried off into slavery in Egypt. You remember the drought, and now the sons of Jacob are all having to go to Egypt to get grain and food, and through it all, now they know that Joseph, who is second in command, is their brother. And now Jacob has come down, and he's getting very old. Chapter 48. It came about after these things that Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is sick." So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him. When it was told to Jacob, "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you," Israel collected his strength and sat up in the bed. Now, by the way, Jacob, heel grabber, has now been renamed Israel, Prince with God. So his name has changed. He has changed. "Behold, your son Joseph has come to you." Israel, that's Jacob, collected his strength and sat up in bed. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. And he said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and numerous, and I will make you a company of peoples, and will give your land to your descendants after you for an everlasting possession.'" This is the Abrahamic covenant. All over again. This is the promise. And we skip down to verse 9. Joseph said to his father, "These are my sons, whom God has given to me here." So he said, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were so dim from age that he could not see. And then Joseph brought them close to him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And we skip down to verse 12. Then Joseph took them from his knees and bowed with his face to the ground. Joseph took them both, Ephraim with his right hand toward Israel's left, and Manasseh with his left hand toward Israel's right, and brought them close to him. But Israel, Jacob, stretched out his right hand and laid it on the hand of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on Manasseh's head, crossing his hands, although Manasseh was the firstborn. Skip to verse 19. When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on Ephraim's head, it displeased him, and he grasped his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Place your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also will become a people, and he also will be great. However, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." It was all about the covenant, all about the promise. And like his father before him, Jacob, no paragon of virtue, but he believed the promise of God. It was in his heart. It was the thing that when he came to death, he's going to pass on, but he's passing on the promise because he believed it. Do you? We'll look at the third one. Joseph. Great name. Love to tell you a lot about him, but Hebrews 11:22 sort of wraps it up right here. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave orders concerning his bones. Back in Genesis 50, verse 24, Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die. Now, they've worked things out between them. Remember when their father died, they thought Joseph was going to kill him now, anything. But no, he said, I don't stand in God's stead here. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good. Joseph saw Romans 8:28 before it ever was printed. It was part of the principle of his life. I'm about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised on oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. So Joseph died at the age of 110 years, and he was embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt. But when they went out, they took his bones. He believed. He believed the promise. See, he believed that God was going to do those things. But listen, folks, when you stop and you count all the years up together, it was over 500 years from the time God first made that promise to Abraham up until about the time they left the promised land. 500 years. And now if you think about it, it's been over 5,000 years, and the Jews still don't have their kingdom. They got close during the time of Solomon, but they never controlled all that God said he would give them. So there's still the promise. There's still the promise that was not fulfilled while they were here. And yet I look at these men, and I remind myself, hey, folks, you don't have to be perfect to be a man or a woman of faith. They were not. In fact, when you think about some of our wonderful heroes of faith in the Word of God, some of them had some real problems. But God is a gracious God, and he is merciful. You don't have to be perfect to be a person of faith. Now, at the same time, I don't want you to think that excuses us when we fall short. It doesn't. It doesn't. In fact, their lives could have been a whole lot better. Things could have happened even more so to bless them in life if they had done things God's way. They did not. But God never fails in his promises. We do. He does not. He never fails in keeping his promises. They took God at his word. You know what's coming next? Do you? You take him at his word? See, because for us it's not the land of Israel, it's not descendants, it is heaven. And as close as some of us are to going there, that moment when we get ready to die, do you really believe that? I want you to notice God's response to their faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 16, just part of the verse, and it says, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a seat for them. Not ashamed. He doesn't even count all of the things they messed up in life, but what he does count is their faith at the end of their life. When they were passing on, they passed something on. It was the faith in the covenant of God. And you know what? This is true for all believers. He has prepared a place for us. There is a legend. The legend says that there was a skeptic, probably a Pharisee, who stood before Jesus trying to prove that Jesus did not have any supernatural power. And this skeptic had something in his hands, and he said to Jesus, Rabbi, What do I have in my hands? Jesus said, you have a little bird in your hands. He was shocked. I mean, there's no way Jesus could have known that. He was shocked. A little bird in his hand. This man does have some... Well, no. He says, Master, Rabbi, is it dead or is it alive? Because what was going to happen is if Jesus said it's dead, he would open his hands and it would fly off and prove that Jesus didn't know. Or if Jesus said it is alive, he would simply crush the bird and open his hands. And Jesus said to him, young man, that decision is yours. See, God knows all about everything that goes on within us. He has a place prepared for us. How you respond to that decision really is yours. But faith is what I hope that you and I would pass on. Let me pass on. Let's pray together. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the lives of these three men. Wish we could talk about every detail because their lives were so interesting. And then to realize, too, Lord, that you used such men and sometimes women who didn't quite have lives that were too pleasing to you, but yet their faith did. So it does, Father, give us hope that you can even take weak folks like us and use our faith. As we come toward the end of our lives, Lord, may you allow us to understand we've got something to pass on. Help us to do it. Whether it's the children or the grandchildren or the people in our block, the next door neighbors, the ones who know us. May they see us as people of faith. And above all things, Father, may you see us as people of faith so that you will not be ashamed of us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.